welcome to this week's video of the Harbor. My name is Callie, and if you missed last week's video, we are currently in a generosity series called With Open Hands. If you missed last week's episode, Chris talked about Luke 6 and how the more grace that you provide, the more grace is provided. And if you missed it, go watch it. It was awesome. But this week, I'm going to be diving deeper into generosity and talking more about what it is and what biblical generosity is. I think, as I was preparing for this video, I was thinking about how I think today's day and age, our world, our country even, is so not generous. Generosity is not in our vocabulary. It's interesting, actually, I Googled the word generosity to get a definition. I didn't end up finding a good definition other than generosity was the act of being generous, so that didn't help. But what I did find was this graph, and I don't know if it does this all the time, but it was from the beginning of the English language all the way till now. And it showed how much the word generosity or generous is used. And it starts up here at the beginning of the English language, and it ends over here, and it goes like this. And it plummets so fast and so crazily that it just doesn't seem to be as big of a deal as it used to be. And of course, our world, our country is not going to broadcast that in flashing lights we are greedy, we are selfish, generosity doesn't matter. But you can live a day and understand that that is something that we are lacking and no longer seems to be as high of a value. So I think for me personally, even just preparing for this video, I learned a lot about generosity and biblical generosity and why it's so important and why it's not just, checking off a box, but it's actually so much more than that. And so I'm really excited to dive into this with you guys and to see what we can figure out. But before I go any further, I would just love it if you guys would take a moment and pray with me. So Father, I just thank you so much, Lord, for your word, the way it continues to guide us, continues to teach us in the midst of a world that seems to be lacking in so many things. Father, I pray that this video, this message, Lord, that it would teach me and it would teach those listening, God, that we'd be able to hear your words clearly and we'd be able to learn and move forward with them. I thank you so much, Father, for all that you are and all that you're doing. And it's in your mighty and powerful name I pray. Amen. So for this week's video, I'm going to be diving into Luke 21 if you guys want to follow along. It's only 4 short verses, though, so I'm going to read it out loud really quick. So Luke 21, starting in verse 1, says, Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. All right, that's it. That's all we need to know about generosity. No, but seriously, what we're looking at here, what we see is this picture of Jesus, and he's hanging out by this offering box. And these rich guys come up and they put in some money, and then they walk away, and it's yeah, sweet, rich guys putting in money. And then we see this poor widow, and not only is she a poor widow, she's a poor widow woman. It's the lowest of the low in this society in this time. And she comes up, and she puts in these 2 coins, and she starts turning to walk away, and Jesus is freaking out. He's this is amazing. She just contributed out of her heart, not just her pocketbook. And, to me, the first time I read this, the first couple of times I read this, honestly, I'm cool. What's the big deal? It's 2 copper coins. And it's funny too, because in my Bible where it says copper coins, it has this little footnote. And at the bottom, it says that the copper coins were 2 Greek lepta. A lepton was a Jewish bronze or copper coin worth about 1/128th of a denarius, which was a day's wage for a laborer. And I actually have these little coins here. Shout out to Laura McKay for these. These are replicas of what they would have looked like. And they're so tiny. They're smaller than my eyeball. They're so small, they look like little dimes. But each one of these was a day's worth of wage. And that's crazy to think about, because just because it was a day's worth of wage doesn't even mean it was enough for her to live on. It just means that it was enough for her to go do a bunch of backbreaking work or do a bunch of handiwork and then get this tiny little coin. Literally, that's it for one day. So what she was giving was not a lot. She really wasn't giving anything. But to her, it was so much. Because in this moment, Jesus chose to recognize, Jesus chose to point out, Jesus chose to see that it was not about the amount of money that she was putting in that box. It was not about how much she was choosing to give. It was about what she was giving up. It was about the posture of her heart. It was her in this moment choosing to say, that she's not going to be caught in this selfish way. She's not going to be caught in this worldly action. She's not going to be caught in this greediness. Instead, she's going to pivot. She's going to shift the focus of her heart, and she's going to choose to say that I want to have a kingdom mindset. I want to live the way that Jesus asked me and told me to live, and I want to give in a way that Jesus asked me and told me to give. Because of this way that she's thinking, because of this way that her heart is behind the action that she's doing, Jesus chooses to call it out, to recognize it, and to say, good job. Like, that is what I'm asking for. That is what I want. Because this woman chose to see that it wasn't about putting money in a box. It was never about the monetary action or the worldly action. It was about this hopeless abandonment, this blind faith, this kingdom living that she was asked to live and do, and that she chose to obediently step into and do. And I just think that's huge and that's crazy, because I think for so many of us, and maybe it's just me, but for so long, to me, generosity has meant putting money in a basket as it's passed by, or putting money in an offering box, or, maybe giving $1 to the homeless person I drive by. But that's just not it. When I do that, I'm doing it to check off a religious box. I'm not doing that to follow after Jesus in a way that he was calling me to follow him. I'm not putting my heart behind it. I'm not putting in all that I am so that I can get all that I want to get out of it, all that Jesus wanted me to get out of it. I'm just doing it to do it. And I think that through this, we can see that generosity, it's not about what we can give, but it's about what we can offer. And you might be like, okay, cool, isn't that the same exact thing, giving an offering? In some ways, maybe. But for the sake of what I'm trying to say, I think when we think about what we can give, that's like a physical thing. Like, realistically, I could give like $7 this week, maybe, or whatever. I can give one of these little coins. But what I can offer is something that is more so the heart behind it, is more so my soul. It's more so what I am choosing to really offer up to Jesus, what I'm choosing to offer up in that moment and say, like, this isn't about me, this is about something else. And actually, as I was thinking about this, and I was like, what is like a good example of this? The first thing that popped into my head was the movie The Grinch. If you haven't seen it and you live under a rock, The Grinch, no, I'm just kidding. It's okay if you haven't seen it, but you should watch it if you haven't. The Grinch is basically the story of this dude, the Grinch. I don't really know what he is other than a Grinch. And he lives in this little town called Whoville. And these Whos are like the most joyous, happy people. They live their days just having a good old time. And he's like living in that society. And one day he's like, enough. And so he like storms up the mountain and he lives in this little cave with his dog, Max. I don't really know where the dog comes from, but it's there. And they just live on top of this mountain, looking down and watching, kind of in disgust, just like, how can they sing so much? How can they be so joyous? Because he just doesn't get it. So one day the Grinch, he hatches this plan and he's like, you know what? I'm going to go and I'm going to steal Christmas. And so he makes a Santa suit. He gives Max reindeer ears. He gets a sled. He goes down to Whoville on Christmas Eve while they're all asleep, and he steals everything. He steals their presents. He steals their furniture. He steals their food. He steals crumbs that are even too small for a mouse. That's a direct quote. Watch the movie. But what we see is we see him go and steal all these material things. And, he's going back up the mountain. He's got literally everything on the sled. Doesn't really make sense how it all fits, but it does. He's going back up the sled on the mountain. And about halfway up, the sun starts to rise and he looks down and he's like, I got him this year. Like, there's no joy anymore. And then there they all are, coming out of their houses, not a care in the world. And they walk into the middle of the square and they hold hands and they start singing their song. Da hoo dora da 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 da. The song. And as they're singing, there's this iconic scene where the Grinch is looking down and he's like, I don't get it. But then all of a sudden he does. He's like, oh, it wasn't about the things. It wasn't about any of it. It was literally about like the joy that they have inside and the joy they have with each other. And his heart grows 3 sizes. And so from there, he goes back down to the village, gives them all their stuff back. And it ends with this great scene of like him at a feast with like Cindy Lou and Max. And, they're cutting up the ham. It's so cute and warm and fuzzy. And you love it. But the point I make with all this, the point that I think really stands out is when his heart grows. He's up on the mountain and he's looking down and he he realizes that it was never about the material things. It was never about how much they had. And in that moment, it wasn't even about how much he had, because he didn't even feel any more joyous because he had taken their things. When he looks down, his heart begins to grow because he realizes that the joy that they have is so much more. The happiness they share, the love they share, it's so much more. And his heart grows, and he turns away from his pride, and he turns away from everything that he's thinking and everything that he's feeling to recognize and to give back. And in that moment, we can see that there's something more behind it all. And it kind of alludes to the fact that like generosity, giving, all these things, like there's something more to it than just the possessions, than just the giving, than just the money. Because when we are generous, when we give, we're doing something that is not in our human nature. Our human nature, from the beginning of time, from the garden, from the day we were born, our human nature is this selfish, sin-filled, stained, just aspect of being that is all about us. Like, what can I have? How can I prosper? How can I enjoy myself? How can I do this? How can I do that? But generosity is literally turning from our human nature. It's literally turning from the way that we were designed, or not designed, but the way that we have fallen, the way that we live our lives. And it's turning from that to step into this new way of living. This way that Jesus calls us to live, this heart of generosity that alludes to the kingdom, that literally gives us a tiny glimpse of heaven, because it's stepping away from this human nature, this sin, this brokenness, this greed, this selfishness, and choosing to step into the things of Jesus, and choosing to step into the things of the kingdom, and seeing more. So when this woman gave, when she put in literally these 2 tiny little coins, was it putting her out a little bit? Yeah, I'm sure. Like, she needed these coins. But what she was getting was worth so much more than a day or two's wage. When she gave and when her heart was behind it, she was getting this glimpse of heaven. She was getting this freedom. Because the ultimate sacrifice, and I think Zach's actually going to talk more about this in one of the upcoming videos, but the ultimate sacrifice, the ultimate act of generosity is Jesus on the cross. When he dies on that cross, when he chooses to turn from everything that he's thinking, everything that he's feeling, he doesn't want to die on the cross, but he does, because he knows that when he does that, we get freedom. We get to step into eternity. We get this relationship with the Father. We get all of these things. So because of that, we get this small glimpse of Jesus' generosity. We get this small glimpse of heaven. We get this small glimpse of turning from our worldliness, turning from our selfishness, and stepping into this new mindset, this new way of thinking, this new way of living, all because we give a little bit with our heart behind it. It seems like such a simple thing, but I think it becomes so complicated when we just enlist it as a way to check off a box. When we enlist it as just throwing in a couple of dollars on a Sunday morning, or, giving $1 to somebody who needs it, or whatever. Like, we can make it seem like this small, simple thing that, yeah, you need to do that. You need to give more. You need to give more. But I think it's so important to understand why. Like, why are we generous? Like, why do we give? Because it's not just about how we're impacting other people. It's about also how we're impacting our hearts, how we're impacting ourselves, how we're choosing to live like Jesus lived. And I feel like I've said that a lot, but it's because it's true. And it's something that I myself didn't even really think I realized until I was reading through this and thinking about it. Is like, generosity is so much more than just little acts. And, I think with the example of this story, and with just kind of some of the examples that I've thrown out there, it seems like a lot of what I've said is generosity and giving is money. But that's not all that it is. Like, generosity is money, but it can also be time, talents, our lives. It can be so many things. It doesn't have to be just physical things. Maybe I'm choosing to be generous with my time because I really need to do a couple homework assignments and get that done. But my friend really needs to talk to me more. And I choose to say, I'm going to sacrifice my selfishness and my desire to do that and go, and I'm going to be generous with my time and give it to someone else. And maybe that's not a good example because we have to do homework, but maybe I wanted to watch a TV show and binge watch Netflix or whatever, and I choose to give it to my friend. But regardless, it's turning from that selfishness. It's stepping into a new way of living. And all of this to say is that I just think it's very important for us to be generous and to give, but to recognize, like I said, that we aren't just doing it to do it, that we really are checking our hearts, checking our souls, and checking the way that we're choosing to pour into that generous act, that generous deed. And it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be a small thing. You know, the other day, one of my friends bought me a coffee and I was blown away. It's like, you want to buy me a coffee? Like, you're broke too. Like, why are you buying me a coffee? But it meant so much because the heart behind it. She was choosing to say in that moment, like, hey, Callie, I love you so much. I'll spend the extra $3. I'll get you a coffee. And I was like, you know, that means so much. Thank you. But seriously, like, it's about the heart behind it. It's about the love. It's about the kingdom living. It's about all of that wrapped into a small little act, a small little moment that we often just brush past, look over, and ignore. Would you guys pray with me again? Father, I just thank you so, so much, Lord, for what generosity is, for this story of the poor widow woman and how she chose to give so little, but yet she was giving so much, how she herself in that moment was learning so much and seeing so much. Lord, I just pray that you would continue to show us as we continue on with our days and our weeks of just how we can be generous, how we can dive deeper, how we can have a kingdom heart and a kingdom mindset over the worldliness, over the greed, over the selfishness that is so easy to just fall into and be a part of. Father, I'm just so grateful for all that you are and all that you're doing. It's in your mighty and powerful name I pray. Amen. Thank you guys so much for watching. It's been a pleasure to be with you guys. Stay tuned for next week as we release another video. Love you guys. Have a good one. Bye.